Welcome to Diala Treats. I'm Diana, and today I'll show you how you can make these adorable mini conchitas perfect every time at home. I'm going to show you in detail all of the steps that I take to make sure that I get fluffy, packed with flavor mini conchitas. If you find this video helpful in any way, please make sure to like, comment, share, and subscribe. Let's get started by weighing out all of our needed ingredients, beginning with our dry ingredients: the salt, yeast, cinnamon, sugar, and bread flour. I try to minimize the amount of dishes that I use, so I weigh out the sugar and the flour in the same bowl. If you don't feel comfortable weighing them out together, you can weigh them out separately and then put them in the same bowl. Once we've weighed out all of our dry ingredients, we will weigh out our wet ingredients, which are our butter, eggs and vanilla, and milk. I changed the unit on my scale to milliliters for the eggs and the milk. One egg measures out to about 50 milliliters. Sometimes the eggs run a little bit smaller or larger. If you're off by 1 to 2 milliliters, that's okay, but if it's off by 3 or more, I would suggest adding a little bit more egg or subtracting some egg. Here you can see that I was trying really hard to get to the 50 milliliters, but I got close enough. I got to 49. Now that we have everything weighed out, it's time to prepare our dough. I use my stand mixer fitted with a dough hook. You can certainly knead the dough by hand, but it's much quicker to do it with the mixer. One key thing to keep in mind is that all of your ingredients should be at room temperature, especially your butter. Your butter should be soft like this so that it can incorporate into the flour more efficiently. If it's too cold, it will take a little bit longer to get incorporated. I let the butter and dry ingredients come together for 2 minutes until I add the eggs and the vanilla. After I add the eggs and vanilla, I let that come together for 2 minutes, and I periodically will scrape down the bowls with a spoon or a spatula to make sure that all of the flour gets coated with the eggs. While the eggs are combining with the dry ingredients, I warm up my milk in the microwave for about 25 seconds. It should reach 120 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. Gradually add in the milk over the course of 2 minutes. Don't pour it in all at once. You want to give the flour some time to absorb that liquid. Once all of the milk has been added, you will let the mixer knead the dough for 3 minutes. The dough will start coming off the sides of the bowl, and it will have a slight stickiness to it. It won't be super sticky. If it's too sticky, you need to add a little bit more flour. I'd say 1 to 2 teaspoons. If it's not sticky, it's no big deal either. It should feel kind of sticky to the touch, but it should not stick to your fingers. One of the main things that you guys messaged me about is your dough not rising. If your dough doesn't rise, it's most likely due to something wrong with the yeast. Your yeast was either expired, it wasn't activated correctly, or it's not the right type of yeast for this recipe. For this recipe, I use Instant Dry Yeast that doesn't need to be activated before you add it into the flour. There's a difference between instant dry yeast and active dry yeast. Active dry yeast has to be activated before you add it into the recipe. So you would put the yeast in some warm milk and mix it and maybe add a little bit of sugar to activate your yeast. You leave it for about 5 minutes and then it will start bubbling up because you're waking up the yeast. And then you will add that into the flour. Since the yeast that I use is instant, I can go ahead and add it to the flour and then just add the warm milk as long as it is between 120 to 130 degrees Fahrenheit. That is going to wake up the yeast. Grease a bowl with some vegetable oil and put the prepared dough in there. Cover it up with saran wrap and put it in a warm place to rest for about 2 hours. I used the bread proofing option in my oven. It helps my dough rise a lot, especially during the cold weather. In the summertime, my dough will double in size in less time. Excuse my dirty oven. By the way, does anyone know how to take off those marks in the oven? I've tried with a little scrub and it didn't come off. Let me know in the comments. While the dough is resting, prepare the topping. You can use the same bowl where you prepared the dough. Put in all of the ingredients, the dry and the wet, in the same bowl. Using a paddle attachment, combine it together until it forms a paste-like or Play-Doh texture. Again, this is something that can be done by hand also, but it will take a little bit longer. Every now and then scrape down the sides of the bowl just to make sure that everything gets incorporated together. At first it will look like this, almost sand-like, and like it's not going to come together, but it is. It will take a total of about 5 minutes for it to come together. Since I used 3 different colors for the topping, I weighed out the topping and then split it into 3 equal parts. If you want your topping to be all one color, then you would just add your food coloring in to the bowl when you add in all of your ingredients. And if you want to make chocolate topping, you would add about half a teaspoon of cocoa powder to this amount of topping. If you split it, you will reduce the amount of cocoa powder. If you split it in half, use about a half a teaspoon. If you split it in thirds, then use about 1/4 of a teaspoon of cocoa powder. The food coloring I use for my concha topping and basically all of my treats are the Master Elites by the Sugar Art. They're honestly the best food coloring I've ever tried in my life. I started using them back in 2019 and I haven't stopped since. I do have a discount code with them if you want to go ahead and try them, or if you tried them before and you want to buy some more, you can use Diala Treats and you'll get 15% off your purchase. For this particular video, I used the colors white, hot pink, and red rose. For my pink ones, I added a bit of strawberry flavoring, and for my red ones, I added a little bit of cocoa powder. The cocoa powder also helps get a deep brick red color, which I really like when I make red conchitas. A little bit goes a long way with this food coloring, so I try to only add a little bit at the very beginning. If at first it looks like the color's too light, be very careful because it will take about 20 to 30 minutes for the color to develop into its true color. So sometimes it's not going to look really deep, but as you let it develop, it will get to a deeper color. Just beware of that. I weigh out the topping to make sure that every conchita gets the same amount. I weigh out 4 grams, 4 to 5 grams, so at the end there's a total of 48 pieces of topping. I put a piece of parchment paper in between each color so that the colors don't mix together. I close up my Ziploc bag and put it in the fridge. The dough has doubled in size. It's time to weigh it and roll it out. At the same time is when I will take out the topping from the fridge, so that it can be ready also once the dough has been rolled. If you don't have a scale, you can use a measuring spoon, a teaspoon, to weigh out 10 grams of dough. Before you place your dough on your trays, make sure you grease it with some butter to make sure that they don't stick once you bake them, and it also gives them that golden color at the bottom. I used to roll these against the tray with my fingers against the tray, but I found that would cramp up my fingers and it took a little bit longer, so I figured that the fastest way is to fold them into themselves like this and then roll it in between my palms, kind of the same way that you will roll a cake pop. Make sure that there are no open gaps. If there are some open gaps when you bake them, they will explode basically, and they won't have that perfect round shape. Before you place the topping on top of the dough, just make sure you grease the top of the dough with some butter, just to make sure that the topping sticks. To flatten out the topping, roll it in between your palms the same way that you rolled the dough, but flatten it out and then finish flattening it out with your fingers as thin as you can. A more efficient way to flatten the topping out is to use a tortilla press. I enjoy the process of flattening out the topping. I find it therapeutic, so I will do it in my fingers. Every now and then though, if I'm short on time, I will use my tortilla press. You may have a little bit of topping left, and that's okay. You can flatten it out and bake it next to your conchitas and then crumble it up to use it on top of desserts. You can save it, store it for a later time. You can freeze it up to a month, or you can just double up the topping on some of the conchitas and have extra topping. Another most common question that I get asked is where I get my bread stamps, and I get them from breadstamps.com. I have basically their whole collection. I'll link their website in the description box. This particular stamp was too big, so I had to pick up the conchita and stamp it on my hand, because if I stamped it on the tray, the stamp was going to go into the conchitas next to it. When you stamp the conchita, you want to stamp it good enough that it goes through the topping, but not too much that it cuts through the dough. Stamping them is literally my favorite part. It's so satisfying. I will show you a clip on how to shape them into hearts here shortly. For this, when I made these, I didn't record the hearts, so here's a different time that I made them. You want to cut the rolled dough down the middle a little bit farther than halfway, and then pinch the other end to form the pointy heart, right? Then you will put it on the tray, flatten it out. You want to make sure that you flatten it out so it can hold the heart shape, because as you let the dough rest again for the second time, they will puff up and they will kind of lose that pointy heart shape. You can use a cookie cutter to cut out the topping into a heart, or you can simply flatten it out and then cut off the excess. Then you would just stamp them the same way that you stamp any regular conchita. Once they have been stamped, we do want to let them rise a second time for about an hour and a half. I put them back in my oven with the bread proofing option. They double in size and the topping looks separated like that. I take them out of my oven and preheat it to 325 degrees Fahrenheit. To make sure that they all bake evenly, I will put one tray at the bottom and one tray at the top and split the baking time in half. So I will bake them for 8 minutes. After the 8 minutes are up, I will switch the trays. The tray that was at the top goes to the bottom, the tray that was at the bottom goes to the top, and then I will bake for another 7 minutes. After those 7 minutes, they're ready to come out of the oven. I put them on my cooling racks and let them cool down before I remove them from the trays. Now let's just take a moment to admire how beautiful they look. The color is perfect, the stamps are perfect, and most importantly, they are packed with flavor and they taste so good. Depending on your oven, you may need to adjust the baking time, but I would say no longer than 16 minutes. After the 16 minutes, you run the risk of over baking them, and unfortunately they'll get pretty dry and hard. Some baking trays conduct heat differently than others, so your bottom of the conchitas may look darker than the ones here in the video. Some of my trays do make the bottoms of my conchitas much darker than these, but as long as there's some golden color to them, they're ready to come out of the oven. To make sure they keep their softness, keep them in an airtight container or in a Ziploc bag and enjoy for the next few days. Thank you so much for watching. I hope you try out the recipe and leave your questions in the comments.